Welcome to Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Hector Montalvo. This show is dedicated to asking tough questions for you, the viewers. We bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Joining us here today at our MCTV studios, we have Lawrence School Committee member Mark Gray. Welcome to the show, Mr. Gray.
Thank you.
Mr. Gray, for those viewers that don't know who you are, who is Mark Gray?
Well, Mark Gray is someone who's been around the United States. He's an individual, has 3 kids. I served in the Marine Corps when I got out of high school. I graduated from Montana. I served some time in the Army Reserves, and steadily employed. Recently and currently active member of the community. Belong to 2 neighborhood groups, and I try to keep on top of things going on in the community.
Great. And you were elected in last election for the school committee member.
Right.
What made you run for school committee member?
Well, what happened is when my oldest son was in the 4th grade, he brought home a note from the teacher. The teacher said he wasn't doing well in school. So I said, "We'll bring your books home. We'll sit down, and it won't be a problem. We'll take care of it." So the next day came, he didn't bring any books home. I said, "Where are your books?" He says, "I'll get them tomorrow." So tomorrow came, didn't have books, and this continued for the week. And finally I said, "You don't come home until those books come home." And he comes home crying, and he says, "Dad, we don't have books. We don't use them." So I went to the school, I talked to the principal, and she says, "Well, we don't use books, and there's nothing that you can do about it." And I don't think she knew that I was a former Marine, and I don't take kindly to that type of attitude when it comes to educating our kids. So I got involved, I studied, I made calls, I went to the government, I went to everyone I could possibly go to, school committee, superintendent, the mayor, Department of Education. No one would lift a finger. I started researching. I found out that Lawrence Public Schools is and has been last in Massachusetts, behind 350 other districts. And no one was doing anything to resolve that problem. So I ran unsuccessfully at one point, and then successful on my second try.
Now, how does it make you feel where Lawrence doesn't contribute? They actually contribute 0% of their educational funding. How does that make you feel? How should that make the taxpayers feel?
Well, I think what should happen from the communities that are contributing into Lawrence is they should be looking at what the school committee does and how they spend their money. For instance, Methuen. I mean, Methuen, Andover, North Andover, they should be looking at Lawrence and saying, "How are you spending our money?" And they should be calling their state rep, their state senator, and saying, "This just isn't acceptable that year after year we put in money so that Lawrence can focus on education. We pay 100%, and we're getting no return on that." And it's a perpetual thing because Lawrence never improves, and they just continue to dwell at the bottom. So there's no return on their investment, and they just keep eating the taxpayers' money. That's something that other communities and people need to look at and start addressing. And on my end of it, I'm probably the only person that understands that money comes from other communities. So I believe that I have a higher duty to provide oversight and accountability on those tax dollars, and I make sure they get it.
So before you got elected, you were basically a concerned parent trying to find out why your children are not being educated or bringing home the proper stuff that they need for education. And you found that there was no open and transparency anywhere in government?
Anywhere. These people would not lift a finger. In fact, the Department of Education will change its rules before they have to get involved in problematic schools and school districts. And that's why you see Just for instance, I gauge it according to how my oldest one moved through the system. A child can actually go through the entire school system, 12 years, before the state will ever become involved, because they allow so much time to transpire before they'll get involved. And then what they do is they change the rules on how they engage the problem systems. And in fact, currently we have, we've always had underperforming schools, but we have now, like I said, the DOE changes the wording and changes how they engage. So now they're called level 4 schools. We have 2 of them. And instead of firing people or removing, which is the term that's used, Lawrence doesn't remove and fire people. They just shift them around into other schools in other areas. So they skirt the problem, they bypass it. They know how to use the system, but they don't fix the problem.
Is there any accountability?
Zero accountability.
Now, we know that when you ran, you were asked if you would fire LeBoy if you was elected, and I believe you were quoted as saying, "Yes, I would fire him. If you look at the numbers, he is certainly not getting the job done."
Right.
So let me ask you, what numbers should the parents and the people be looking at that will show or indicate that he wasn't doing his job?
Well, there's different ways to look at what's going on in the school system. And as a general rule, I use a couple of measures. I use the MCAS results because I don't have to take that from the school system. I go to the Department of Education website, I look it up, and I get to evaluate and look at the performance. And, so basically I can't be told a lie. I get the numbers straight from the state. If those numbers are wrong, then someone in the system is fixing the numbers. The other one I have a tendency to look at is bostonnews.com. And every single year they evaluate school systems. And I believe that for consistently a decade, Lawrence has been at the bottom of that list. But for parents, I would say individually to the student and the parent, I would look at the MCAS results that are sent home, not so much the letter grades that are on a report card. Because when you think about it, 70% of the kids are failing according to MCAS, which means 7 out of 10 kids should be getting a D and an F, but they don't. So those report cards go home with A's, B's, C's. It's not a true reflection of the knowledge that they're learning. So I would tell to the parents, focus more on the MCAS results that come home and then compare that to the report card and look for the discrepancy.
Now, you also stated that under Dr. LeBoy's administration, that he brought shame into the school system. What kind of shame did he bring?
Well, I think there was a lot of different levels of shame that not only him as an educator, someone working with kids in a leadership position, but also what he allowed to transpire under the nose of everyone. He made a mockery of the government. The school committee is an elected leadership position, and they should conduct themselves appropriately. But what we have instead are elected officials who are receiving favors or benefits in exchange for their vote on the committee. And to watch that is a shameful embarrassment of the entire way that people operate. You look at a superintendent, principals, and elected officials, you don't want to see a guy that's there that's going to get a security job after his term, or a position with the city government, or a lady that was racking up $900 a month in cell phone bills that was getting paid off by the school system. Or even lately we had the whole thing with the flyers where school committee members were being compensated and given materials to run in, and in exchange for their votes. And it's consistently down the line where the administration has basically bought off a school committee so that they could do whatever they want and get away with it.
Now, does this happen open or does it happen closed, behind closed doors?
It's so blatant that it's not hard to pick up on. And if it's happening in the open, then, it's happening behind closed doors.
Now, according to the New England Press Association, the Massachusetts legislation was considering changes to open meeting laws. The representative who brought that bill forward later withdrew it. That particular bill had a measure calling for a $1,000 fine for any elected or appointed official that holds an open meeting illegally.
Right.
Will you sit in a meeting that should be open to the public but is closed to the public under your first term as a school committee member?
Well, we actually had a meeting that borderlined a violation, and that was actually the meeting, I believe, where we met to discuss the firing of the superintendent. And what had happened is we were not given proper notice of that event. The mayor just decided to do it on his own without going through the proper channels. And what I had done is I looked up the rules. We had to have 48 hours, they had to be posted, and we needed the attorney present and all these things. And what I did is I emailed the superintendent and I gave her the list, the criteria of what we needed to legally meet to even do it. And had those needs not been met, I was not going to sit in on that meeting. So I'm very much against it, and in fact, I don't even like to broach on that. I think, and it disgusts me that actually even happened. We had another one where I was bound to show up. We had a meeting that was scheduled, and we got emailed. And we were told that that meeting was not going to happen so the mayor and some people could go to a baseball game. And I'm like, well, this never went through the school committee, so it has no authority. So I showed up for the meeting, parents had showed up for the meeting, but the meeting never took place. And I looked that up. And the remedy for that is for me to go to the Superior Court and force the mayor and the committee to have meetings when they say they're going to have meetings. And the requirement for me is 3 registered voters. If I get 3 registered voters to sign off on a complaint, I go to the Superior Court and I basically tell them, enforce the law. So there are issues in there, and the only way that we're ever going to have accountability to the public is for the public, and this is the problem in Lawrence, is the public needs to put forth honest, hardworking people with some kind of integrity on these elected positions. Because if they did, these things would never happen.
Now, it was publicly stated by another Lawrence school committee member that parents in the Lawrence district were labeled as difficult parents. When you were questioning the school before you became school committee member, did you find that to be the same as the last school committee member that stated that?
Well, I'm probably hold almost a king title on difficult parent, because I actually became the difficult parent who became a school committee member. But I think there's a that question. If I have a parent that comes to me and demands something that's outside the realm of what's legal or what can be done, or just not listening to any reasoning whatsoever, there's really not much I can do. And the parent really cuts off their own avenue for help, because no one is going to advocate harder or more for them than me. There is no representative that fights harder for the people than I am. There's no representative that holds a stronger, deep-rooted feeling for representation than me. I make sure that every person is gotten back to, every phone call is returned, every email. I do everything that I can to reach out to the neighborhood meeting groups. I even go to the neighborhood group leaders just periodically to check in to see if anyone's complained about anything or there's been any questions. So I field things indirectly, I field things directly. I do whatever I can to advocate for them. In fact, interestingly enough, one of my political opponents brought a couple of items up that he was concerned about, and I've been addressing those. And I don't let things go. I continue to address them repeatedly over and over again, and every time there's an issue, like the heat in the frost school was an issue, every time that comes up, I throw it in everyone's face that they're not doing anything about it, that I tried to do something and they put obstacles in the way, and that this is an issue. And I berate and beat the administration over the head with something that was a concern of one of the parents in my community. So representation for me holds no boundaries. Even if it was a political opponent or someone who just didn't really have good intentions or anything, if they have a concern, I don't let it go, and I advocate for them as strong as I can.
Now, every citizen has a moral duty to expose wrongdoing or corruption. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So why do you think it took so long to get rid of Dr. LeBoy?
I'll tell you, because it's a leadership thing. A leader, and you got to remember, I'm not looking at this from a current perspective. I'm going back to when I was 18, well, actually 16, when I was student council president, when I was in the Marines. And leadership is when you see something that's wrong or something that is corrupt is brought to your attention, you act upon it. If you do not act upon something that you know is wrong or something that is brought to your attention, you are not a leader. And you therefore should not be in a leadership position. If someone brings something to my attention that's wrong, I'm obligated, just by moral decency and just the sheer fact that any leader would, act on that issue. So I'm internally obligated to act when someone brings something to my attention. And if I didn't, then I'm unfit to hold that seat. And there's a lot of people on the committee, the city council, and elected officials throughout. They have no leadership.
And what would you do different to make sure that that leadership that the people need becomes a reality in Lawrence?
Well, I mean, I can do what I can on my end. I help people when they ask for information, when they want to meet. I give anything I can to anyone I can. I meet, I go places and talk to people. I've working on getting commitments from people that are running for office now to do an audit of Lawrence Public Schools, to cut back on funding for the Department of Education if they fail to respond or meet any of the requests from people like me. So I'm working on that end of it. But really, people have to get up off their butt, stop putting lawyers and corrupt officials in all these positions. They have to go and they have to look at their neighbor and say, that's a stand-up guy. That's a guy I would like to have on the school committee. Let's get him to run and let's support him. That's what they need to do. And until they get off their butts and do that, we're always going to be having these problems.
And what is Lawrence School doing now in regards to maybe the bullying that just passed?
Well, I'm not up to speed on that.
So the school committee hasn't met in regards to what rules and what?
We have a discipline code, and I haven't reviewed it fully, and I'll tell you why I haven't reviewed it fully. Well, there are things like a book. But when I see something that's problematic or riddled with issues and problems and concerns, I'm not going to spend my time absorbing hours into something that really should be put in the trash. When it comes to the issue of like discipline and violent kids, really what needs to be done and should be getting done are things that are being done successfully in other communities and states. And one of those things is having parent volunteers in the classrooms. You look at a place like Lawrence, where you have a lot of people that could benefit from learning computer skills, learning English, where we have so many ESL people in the city. They could volunteer in the schools and sit in the classes with their kids, get an education. And in exchange for that, when these kids start acting up, become violent or aggressive, the teacher can say, Mr. Smith, would you call, Joe's parents and tell them to come to the school and get him? He's obviously not behaving properly. That parent goes down, calls the kid's parents, come pick up your kid. I can't believe the way this kid is acting. You need to deal with this. That's one way to deal with the violence. We have parent liaisons in schools. It's a Title I federal requirement. They get paid, not big bucks, but they get paid. And they sit in the schools. They can make phone calls. They can make phone calls to parents. And teachers have a responsibility, I believe, to act on this, especially when they're young. Because if they continue this behavior for 8 years, they get into high school, and now it's the drinking, the fights, the drugs, and everything that's going on in Lawrence. And the reason why this has been allowed to continue is because these superintendents are obsessed with keeping federal reporting numbers up. So if they kick these kids out of school, their numbers drop. So that's their incentive. They don't care about the other kids in the school. They care about numbers. That's it.
So basically they have to keep a certain percentage.
Keep the numbers up. And that's why we have School for Exceptional Studies. The name of it, when you hear School for Exceptional Studies, you're thinking, gee, that kid's top 10% material. Probably going to go on to college, right? No, these are problematic kids. But we label and we hide what's going on in the system. We can't do that. If I want my kid to go to school to learn, if my kid doesn't do that, we have an issue at home. All of my kids know that they go to school to learn, nothing else. Everything else is secondary. That is their job. I go to work, they go to work at school. Their job is to learn. So it's spelt out for my kids. And when my kids go, the teachers have an obligation to make sure the environment and the materials and instruction is there for that child. If there's another child whose parents aren't as obligated as I am, who's disruptive, he needs to be removed. That child needs to be removed. And you need to have a discussion with the parent saying, listen, I have 29 other students that want to learn. You deal with your son so that he can be one of those 29. That's how we need to deal with that. And that's not what's going on.
Now, how much money did Lawrence get this year? I think it was like $32 million, is that?
Well, 32 was the grant money.
Okay.
And what was it? 30